Hello everyone, and welcome back. So hopefully you have just finished Unit 1, and now we're starting Unit 2, which starts with Chapter 4, which is all about consciousness. And for the sake of the first module, what we're going to be focusing on is just what consciousness is and what various states of consciousness there are. So for the sake of this class, how we're going to define consciousness is it's the state of awareness of ourselves and the world around us. So if you recall, when we were talking about sensation, that was all about bringing information from the outside world in. But our contact with that outside world and our awareness of the outside world is our consciousness. So you might be asking yourself, what does it mean when we are conscious? And what does it mean when we are unconscious or don't have that lack of awareness? And even when we're asleep, we still have some bit of awareness of our surroundings. If you don't believe me, how many of you have gone to sleep and set an alarm clock for the warning? And when that alarm went off, did it wake you up? If it woke you up, at least to some capacity, it means that you were still aware of the outside world. You heard that alarm going off and it woke you up. So you were at least a little bit conscious. And so that's what we mean in this chapter and in this class when we talk about consciousness. It's just our awareness, not only of ourselves, but of the world around us. And there's all sorts of levels of awareness. But when we are the most awake, the most aware, we're awake and alert of everything around us, that is what we mean for fully focused and aware. So it is our focused awareness. So as I mentioned, when you're asleep, there's just a little bit of you that's still aware of the surroundings, enough that it wakes you up in the morning if there's like this startling sound, like your alarm going off. But when we're fully awake, we call that focused awareness. So that means that you're kind of aware of everything that's around you. You are fully focused on something. So when you're working on a puzzle, when you're fully into that activity, you're looking at every single piece, you're trying to put it together. When you're fully focused on an activity, we call that focused awareness. For those that play video games, when you're really in the zone and you're aware of all of your surroundings, oh, there's a sniper over there, oh, I need to duck over here, like you are fully focused. You are engaging in focused awareness. Or for those that do sports, when you're aware of all the players in a sport, let's say it's football, and you see where the quarterback is, where the tacklers are, and all of that, you are focused. You are fully focused. You are in focused awareness. And that's the kind of awareness, the type of consciousness that I am hoping that during class you are engaged in. However, this doesn't always happen, and there's different types of awareness. And we call this divided or drifting awareness or consciousness. So as I mentioned in class, what I'm hoping you're in is focused awareness. You are completely awake, completely focused on the surroundings around you. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we are more in divided consciousness, or even more so, drifting consciousness. And what I mean by divided and drifting consciousness is when you are in divided consciousness, your attention is divided into two main things. So a lot of times it means that you're trying to focus on two things at the same time, so your attention is being taken up by two things at the same time, therefore it's divided. Another way that we can talk about this is when you are engaging in multitasking. So when you are multitasking, you are engaging your focus and your awareness to two main things. Therefore, it's divided. So for instance, let's say that you are sitting in class and you're taking notes, but at the same time you have your phone out. And every time you get a message, whether it's Snapchat, TikTok, an instant message, a phone call, suddenly you are taking your awareness, you're taking your focus, and you're focusing on your phone. You're like, ooh, who just said that? And I'm sure that you've been in classes where, you've just very quickly checked your phone, and your instructor says, hey, you need to be off your phone, you need to be focusing in class. And you say, I am focusing, it was just a quick message, I was paying attention to what you were saying, I was just checking my messages. Technically speaking, you weren't paying attention for those split seconds that you were looking at your phone, because your attention was divided. You have to, in order to read something on your phone, even if it's for a split second, you're dividing that attention, you're dividing that awareness, you're dividing that consciousness. And that's what we mean by divided consciousness. You might have felt like you were paying attention 100% of the time, but in fact it was split. It was divided for that split second, and you might have missed a couple seconds of instruction. And again, might not seem like that much, but as we're about to find out and about to talk about, those few seconds where you're dividing your consciousness could make all the difference. So that's divided consciousness. If we go a bit more further, we have something known as drifting consciousness. What that means is that... Skylar. What that means, ignore my cat, what we mean by divided, or drifting I should say, consciousness, is that what you're focusing on, what you're thinking about, is kind of moving from one thing to another and another. Like your awareness, what you're focusing on, is changing. It's drifting. And I'm sure, I always use examples kind of from the classroom, I'm sure there's been instances where you've been sitting and thinking in class, taking notes, and all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, I wonder what's for lunch today. Oh, that's right, it's Friday, so it must be pizza day. Did I remember to bring enough money for pizza, and do I have enough to get ice cream too? And before you know it, it's been half an hour and you have no idea what your instructor was talking about. What was happening is your focus was drifting from one thought to another, and we call that drifting consciousness. So if you've ever engaged in daydreaming, that is a drifting consciousness, because what you're thinking about, what you're focusing about, is kind of going from one thing to another. Now, I mentioned that when we talked about drifting and divided consciousness, especially divided consciousness, a lot of times we think, oh, well, yeah, I was checking my phone for a couple seconds, but that's fine. For the most part, I was paying attention. However, with divided consciousness, it can get dangerous very quickly, like the idea of texting and driving, or being on our phone while we're driving. A lot of times, yes, when we're driving, we're fully focused on the road, we're focused on all of those various signs, we're focused on the cars around us and what they're doing. But if you are texting and driving, or if you're on your phone while driving, even those split seconds when we're answering the phone just to quickly tell someone, hey, I'm driving, I'll call you later. Even in those split seconds, our focus, our awareness, our consciousness is on that message. We're listening to what that person is saying on the phone, or we're comprehending, what they've just texted us on the phone. And for that split second, that might be all the difference of, the person in front of you is suddenly slammed on their brakes. And so, if you're focusing on the phone, those split seconds, while they are only split seconds, are being taken away from, that attention that you should have while you're driving. And so that's what divided consciousness is. It's multitasking. It might seem like we're paying attention, but those few seconds can make all the difference. And even in class, it might seem like we're only checking our phones for a few seconds at a time, but those few seconds can be all the difference between, my instruction, the important stuff on your exam, and, what your friend is saying. And that's why instructors a lot of times get on you when you're on your phone. It might seem like it's not that much, but when it adds up, like you can be missing that crucial instruction. And then, as I've said, there's drifting consciousness, which is very similar. If you're daydreaming while you're driving, the majority of the time you might be focusing, you might be really aware of the cars around you, but if you start really listening to your music, getting really into it, or you have a friend with you, and you kind of space out, that can make all the difference with driving. And it's the same thing with the classroom. So again, we want that fully focused consciousness, that fully focused awareness, but it can very quickly go between drifting or divided consciousness. And to remember the difference, divided consciousness is a lot of times between two main things and you're dividing your attention, whereas drifting consciousness is going from one thought to another to another. Another way that I like to explain divided attention, divided consciousness, and this idea of multitasking is you have 100% of your awareness. That's it. You can't give something 110%. It's a common phrase, but you can only have 100% concentration and focus. If you're checking your phone while also listening, yeah, the majority of the time you might be listening, but you're not truly multitasking. It's not giving 100% to both things. It might be 80-20 or 50-50, but you can't give 100%, 100%. And in those percentages, in that 20% of that 20-80, that 20% might have been something really important. Again, it might have been something that could have saved your life, sort of thing. And so there's also this thing that happens when we're doing divided consciousness, when we're focused on one thing versus something else, and it's known as inattention blindness. There's going to be other videos that I'm going to be linked at the bottom of the description of this video that go with a worksheet that is also for this class, which is going to test and show this inattentive blindness. But it's this whole idea that, again, with divided consciousness, when you're focusing on one thing, everything else around you, you become blind to, because you're not focusing on that. Your focused attention is on one thing and one thing only. Another way to explain inattentive blindness is to think of a spotlight. And whatever you're focusing on, that's what that spotlight is on. And so everything else is kind of fading into darkness. It's fading into the background. And you're actually not aware of what's going on. And it might sound bizarre, but a lot of times when we're really, really focused on something, it's surprising just how much goes outside of our awareness, outside of our consciousness. But the videos that I'll have linked that go along with the worksheet that you'll be doing will explain that even better. And so essentially, this is what we're talking about when we talk about consciousness. You have that focused awareness where you're fully awake, you have a high level of alertness. You know, when something happens, you notice immediately. And so examples are when you're learning something new or you're in an activity that you really like. So in a really engrossing activity, you have your full focused awareness. But then we get into drifting consciousness. So again, it's kind of your level of alertness, your awareness is variable, it's changing. Because you might be really focused on one thing, and then kind of not so focused, and your mind drifts to something else, and then it goes to something else, etc. And a classic example, as I've mentioned, is daydreaming. Then we talk about divided consciousness, which I've talked about before. It's like multitasking, as it's mentioned. So it's medium, your attention is split between two things. So again, it's not 100%, 100%, it's 50-50, 80-20, 75-25. So there's still some level of awareness and focus and alertness, but not as much as if you were fully focused, fully aware. And then, as we're going to talk about in more detail in later modules, we're going to talk about sleeping and dreaming, where you have a very low level of alertness, a low level of awareness, but you are still conscious in some way, state, or form. And so, of course, we're going to be talking about sleep and various things that happen in a later module of this chapter. And then the last thing is when there is waking states of altered consciousness. And a lot of times, for changing of consciousness, this can be when you are under the influences of certain drugs that change your awareness of yourself and your surroundings, or things such as hypnosis and meditation, which we will also talk about more in the next modules.